a subject matter expert is rather put in the center of the equation and not so much a linguist, then I think you'll just turn to any subject matter kind of a business pricing model. Like, you don't pay lawyers by the pages they look at, you pay them by hour.
So if I could bullet point out a text and then it writes it for me, that would be quite an amazing productivity hack and potentially something a translator could use.
And you don't know who you're going to get, so you don't have everybody kind of trying to swarm around one buyer.
And welcome to Slater Pod 48, your favorite language industry podcast. A warm welcome from the town of Zurich.
Oh, and a very warm welcome from London.
And today you're going to hear us in our new soft voices coming to you courtesy of the Shure Mic MV7.
There
Right?
we go. What an improvement. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sensing a lot of excitement.
No, I like it. So, yeah. But we're obviously more focused on the substance than the polish, but polish is good too.
Oh, I had a call today with somebody who records podcasts, and they're actually sending the equipment to people, like the recording equipment, like physical recording equipment, and then people record it, and then they would send it back. So, like, that's another level. At least we try to get better microphones. And that's thanks to Alexander Drexel from the Troublesome Terps.
Yeah.
He actually recommended that mic to me. It's a very new mic. And so, thanks. Thanks, Alexander. So, great podcast today. We're going to have Chris Stanovsky on, the CEO of Sumo Lingua Tech, today. He's going to give us a lot more information again on data annotation. We had Kare on, who spoke about data annotation. Chris also acquired a business that's in data annotation, and he's been super active in M&A. So we really want to hear his take on, some of the Linebridge acquisition stuff and just the general how business has been going for them. Then on the agenda, I came across a really amazing new product discovery I want to share, and I'm super excited. And maybe you can pour some cold water on that. I don't know. Let's see. I think it could have implications for the language industry in the short to medium term, not long term, but short term. And then there's been a massive association launch in media localization. You're going to talk about, Esther, right? And then we're going to talk about a bit about freelancer testing. First, though, I got to say I'm sold on remote conference networking now.
Oh, yeah. What's changed?
I am sold because I had 4 quick networking chats yesterday on our very own India conference yesterday, which we had over 130 people. Really interesting panel there with Sandeep, Sarika, Sheetal, and Ranjit. I'm going to tell you a bit more about them in a second. But basically, the platform we're now using has this networking feature which kind of randomly plugs you into, connects you with different people. And I know, I'm sure a lot of people have done this before and they don't understand my excitement, but to me, this was the first time, and I love it. It's great. It just connected me
It's like a roulette, isn't it? You spin the wheel, you don't know who you're going to end up talking to, but it's quite nice.
No, it was great. And I mean, we connected over 150 chats. I mean, in that small conference, right? I mean, it's
in half an hour, wasn't it?
We enabled, it was one before and one after. So it was a total of 1 hour. But there was a total of about 150 chats that the conference enabled. And I mean, that's amazing to me. That's great. So, we're going to do that at SlaterCon Remote. So we're going to have 500 or 1,000 or whatever conversations there that we're going to be enabling. So, not too late to sign up. Great. So we had, again, Sandeep from BITS, Vernac, and Sitlop. And then we had Sarika from the government organization FICCI, ILIA. They're basically a government division that enables the language industry and drives it forward. Then we have Sheetal, the founder and CEO of White Globe. And then Ranjit Oak from Pernod Ricard, India, the chief commercial officer. So that was great to have that buyer component. And we'll write about it, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. But basically, general excitement around kind of reaching deep India, like the billion or so people that have, I think they use that term, the billion or so people that are not fluent in English or don't speak English at all. And then Ranjit, again, from the buyer side, like he encouraged the industry to like team up and begin to think how to meet all that emerging demand. So he said, look, you guys are going to have to somehow come together and standardize a little bit more. He also stressed on the MT side, I found it very interesting. He said, look, MT is going to be the usual productivity boost, etc. But he, as a brand guy, he was very concerned around MT mishaps and how this could eventually damage or potentially damage the brand. So, I'll look forward to the quote that we're going to have and the write-up. But interesting. With that, you also gave a short introduction. How did you like the platform?
I quite like the platform. Yeah, it was actually smoother than I think a couple of our practices had been. But yeah, it's quite nice. You feel like you're kind of joining a stage. So pretty smooth all in all. But yeah, it'll be good to use it a bit more. Well, again, in SlateCon Remote as well. And I did like the connections as well. That was quite interesting.
I liked it. It was, and I spoke to my wife about it, and she was like, that would be perfect for me, because like sometimes it's a little hard to just like approach a table of people, but like here it's just, it's like you get connected.
Well, and my feedback as well was that it potentially, which is, I mean, I understand that people want to talk to people they haven't seen in a long time at conferences and talk to people that they already know, but I think actually it's potentially helpful in facilitating new connections, new introductions that, as your wife said, it might be that little bit harder for newcomers at an industry event. So that's great. And you don't know who you're going to get. So you don't have everybody kind of trying to swarm around one buyer. It's kind of, I guess, is not necessarily great because you want to make a beeline sometimes for buyers. But I guess this gives an equal access, equal opportunity to everyone.
Yeah, and it feels like, it doesn't feel like, this is not done yet. This whole remote conferencing experience isn't done yet. I feel we've made a good choice, and that they're going to build this out. So, let's see how it evolves. Let me talk about a product I came across this week, which I found so interesting. It's a company called Otherside AI. Very young people founded it. A super young company called, again, Otherside AI. They raised $2.6 million in seed funding. They've only been around for like 6 months. They're based in New York. So what is it? Basically, you write bullet points, and then it'll basically finish the sentence for you. So or finish the whole text. So you just write like 8, 9, 10 bullet points, and then it'll just write the whole composition for you. And it's based on that GPT-3 model, that big OpenAI language model we covered about half a year ago when they launched, and like everybody was super excited about all of the applications of it. Yeah. And so this seems to be one of the very first commercializations of that GPT-3 model. And the first use case they decided to go for, that is Otherside AI, the first use case is email, right? So they're plugging it as like an email productivity tool where, again, you bullet point it out, and then it writes the full composition for you. They said, we just were in touch with them today, they said that email is a huge market, it's highly complex, so it's very difficult to build a product that works well, giving us a lot of potential for differentiation and defensibility. So it's a conscious choice to go into email. But I think there's so many more applications for that particular tech, right? And then the article that some niche publisher that covered that fundraising, they said it was entirely based on GPT-3, but it's not. So when we talked to the founder there, they said, no, it's not just using GPT-3 would lead to extremely inconsistent results and a product that wouldn't be very beneficial. So they had to build a couple of layers on top of GPT-3 to make this work. Anyway, in my view, potential implications is for kind of more interactive translation maybe, or like a productivity hack for translators. As a translator, you're typing a lot, right? I would type 8, 9, 20, whatever, no, not 20, maybe 15 pages a day. That's a lot of typing. So yes, you can do the dragon naturally speaking, but not everybody wants to sit in front of a computer and talk like for hours and hours. So if I could bullet point out a text and then it writes it for me, that would be quite an amazing productivity hack and potentially something a translator could use. And they also, there's a translation component in the sense that you can write English and you can write the bullet points in English, right? And then it would just write the text for you in Spanish or whatever language you prefer. Now, I haven't really figured out how this could be applied And you also questioned that just before the podcast, like what's the use case for that? But
well, I think my query was, if you're talking about in use for translators, then if you're having to bullet point based on in a target language based on a different source language, then that's kind of a different cognitive action, I think, or cognitive task. So to arrive at a bullet point might actually be more difficult, more challenging than just translating, than just typing it out. Yeah, and also, I mean, if you're thinking about accuracy and things like that, you don't want it to be auto-generated or auto-populated from. You want to kind of focus on translating what's there. I can see maybe that might, like when the technology develops, maybe it would be useful for giving somebody a brief. So, for example, in transcreation or something, you give somebody a brief in English, and then it will do a first pass at creating that final article in Spanish or French or whatever, and you then go through and refine it. Actually, that might be helpful when you don't want a literal rendering, because then you're not stuck with having the source words that influence your target translation. But I think if you're talking about basically asking translators to summarize a text in their target language, that's a summarization task, which is different from the task of translation. So I'm sure there is an application, and never say never, but I wonder how that would help, or whether it would hinder in some ways.
But I'm so excited about this, and now you're telling me.
You should be. I think it's brilliant for emails. And but do you think it's better than the Google thing?
Which
Google
thing?
has Google, when you type an email, has got predictive text, so you can just tab or whatever to select the next word. So that's kind of a predictive one. This is,
No, I hear you. But that I rarely use that because it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, it's not going to write an entire composition for me, right? But
no.
I think first and foremost, it's a productivity hack for people who write. So let's see if we can maybe use it, because we write a lot as well, right? And if I don't have to type, I'm not a super fast typer. I guess I'm a little old for that. Sorry, I only learned typing when I was like 20 years old. No, I'm not that bad, but I'm not like kind of a natural typer. So I would really like somebody to take the heavy lifting of typing. If it's then totally goes off into the wrong direction, then obviously it wouldn't be great. But I mean, if it really summarizes what I'm trying to say, not summarizes, the opposite. If it expands my bullets, then I'm not a style, I
guess when style doesn't really matter and it is information purposes only, then that would be, if it's a kind of rote or standard type format, then that would be helpful. I wonder if it's one bullet to one sentence, or whether it's capable of, if you bulleted several ideas within one bullet, would it be able to form different sentences, or is it assuming that one bullet equals one, idea or one communication or instruction?
Let me just check out I'm watching the thing. Super helpful using 2 more weeks. I think it's not stuck one bullet, one sentence. I think it's more interactive than that.
That's pretty smart.
Well, to end on that particular story, I mean, I just think that I think there are applications of this GPT-3 now that are going to influence the translation localization industry. And this is a first interesting use case that's coming out. But there's so many more that I just can't think off the top of my head in a podcast, right? It would be great if I could, but I can't. But I mean, the fact that you can type something in English and it'll write you a Spanish composition, that there's going to be some use case for that, or just as a productivity hack, as I said. Anyway, let's move on to the world of entertainment, globalization.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Well, so we had news coming out of the entertainment localization or globalization world yesterday. So there's a new industry association called the Entertainment Globalization Association that launched, I think, a couple of days ago. It has 10 founding companies and more than 50 forming companies. So it's currently 60 plus media localizers that are in this question.
What's the difference? Founding company, forming company?
I mean, it's probably some sort of membership level thing. I mean, most of the founding companies, the ones that were named at least, are some of the best known media localizers. So you've got SDI Media, Zoo Digital, VSI, Deluxe, Ayuno, Plint, and you have Keywords Studios. And so you've got these core media localization specialists and video game specialist Keywords Studios.
Going beyond the dabbling keywords, are we?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. But I also think that this association will potentially cater to video game localization providers as well as what we understand to be sort of media and entertainment localization.
Good point. Yeah, entertainment. I mean, gaming is entertainment, so.
Or leisure. I don't know. Leisure, entertainment. Same thing, I suppose. Yeah.
Who runs it? What's the point? What's the goal? Who runs it? What's the definition?
Oh, the definition. Yeah, so I think this is quite interesting. Well, firstly, their goal, they've said, is to create a closer connection to the creative community to better facilitate the retelling of their stories for global audiences. That's the goal. And they're going to do things like create standards, provide research, and training and education and things like that. But globalization, so the G in that EGA title is dubbing, subtitling, and audio description services. So there's a very targeted set of services that comprise that definition. So you've got dubbing and subtitling plus audio description, which, as we know, is an access service. So primarily for hard of hearing. Yeah.
So, they're taking the globalization term very narrowly, right? I mean, usually in the internationalization, globalization, localization, historical kind of framework, it was a very, very broad definition. But in this case, well, let's add another.
But I think that's kind of part of their core identity. Really, is to keep it narrow. So this is very much focused on service or on those companies that service customers. The OTT customers, the streaming customers, and the Hollywood studios, essentially. So it's still very much a niche, that industry. And I think that this association obviously is kind of keeping it that.
Yeah, they want to keep it that way.
Intending to keep it that way. So you asked me who heads it up. So there's a new managing director. That is Chris Fettner. He's a real expert in entertainment localization. He's worked across many different organizations, including the BBC Studios, Discovery, and also Netflix, which was his most recent role. And he led the content localization vendor strategy. So he will have been very involved with a lot of these media localization companies as well.
He was the man to meet at Netflix, content localization vendor strategy. Yeah. That was the
nice.
That was the lead you wanted to talk to. Yeah. Interesting, yeah. So again, you said that it highlights that it still remains a niche, and they have very different set of challenges, right? From kind of the more text-based localization companies.
For sure, yeah. I had a quick look at the list of the 50 or so companies beyond those 10 founding companies, and that none of them, as far as I can tell from a quick glance, are what we would call the traditional text-based LSPs. Yeah. So this is very much those companies that have grown up doing dubbing and subtitling, coming from the entertainment space rather than the translation space. But yeah, I mean, as we've said before, there's a lot of very specific set of challenges that goes alongside servicing these kind of massive entertainment companies as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's see where it goes. We should talk to Chris. And,
definitely, yeah.
Cool. Moving on from globalization and globalizing entertainment to freelance testing. We had a poll and an article last week, and actually it was one of the more, well, what would you call it? I mean, a fair amount of people participated. We had 150 people clicking on that poll, which is higher than some of the other polls we have, which some people criticize.
I guess it's a thorny issue or a contentious matter, because obviously the responses were also divided. It wasn't just like 90% of people said one thing.
So what was the question? What did we ask?
So the question was, should LSPs pay freelancers for taking translation tests? So there was no qualification around different scenarios, yes, no. What do we have here? Just over 50% of people said yes, always. So always pay translators for taking tests. 36% said depends, case-by-case basis. And 10% said no, they should always be free, which I suppose is fair enough.
It's probably the vendors clicking.
It's probably the vendor managers like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, what are your thoughts around testing? I mean, I found it kind of a double-edged sword in a sense. In my LSP days, you can't live with it. You can't live without it, definitely. But it's kind of often as we say in French, l'art pour l'art, right? I mean, it's like you just do it because you kind of have to. But like, it has to be a very specific text that really. I mean, how are you're testing someone on a piece? And then they deliver the test, and then you add them to the system, but you add them for a lot more text types, potentially mostly, right, than they were tested for. So how relevant was that text? How indicative of the actual skill was it? And then the translator would still need to really establish rapport with the project managers later on. So, I mean, you were very closely involved in that. What are your thoughts around testing and then onboarding freelancers?
Yeah, I think it's a really good description to say it's a double-edged sword. I think testing in this format is there because there's no real better way of doing it. I mean, I think personally, if you already have a certain number of freelance translators that are highly specialized and you like working with them, probably for me, one of the best recruitment tools I found is referrals. So you've got a highly specialized translator. Obviously, you can't rely on that for everything because that potentially won't allow you to scale up to the level that you need. So testing, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's very challenging to replicate the sort of live project settings within a test scenario. You have to be very, very specific if you want them to work in a very specific field or on a particular client account. So it's going to be quite difficult. And you obviously don't want to put too much or too many requirements or require too much effort and time of a translator who potentially is very good, but maybe not suited for that particular text type, all for nothing. So obviously translators or freelance translators have a business to run themselves. So I mean, I think, but generally speaking, I think if you're a freelance translator or let's switch it around, if you're an LSP and you're trying to onboard and recruit a number of freelancers, then yes, it makes sense to test them. And I think obviously you want to do all you can to make that testing efficient and effective. But that is difficult. And I think I wouldn't necessarily recommend paying translators if you're inviting them to join your database. However, I mean, I think if you have a translator as an LSP that's already on your database and you want to use them to pitch for new business, so like to complete a translation test on behalf of a client, I think 100% that should be paid. That should be a business development associated cost.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before the podcast, we also spoke about that the European test thing. Let's briefly mention this as well in connection with the test.
I mean, I think that's just not a nice, but an apt example of a customer maybe, or a buyer not getting it exactly right and how testing can go wrong, can sometimes sort of harm your relationship with with those translators and what have you. So what happened, I think this was a massive contract last year, so December 2019, that was run for the Trad 19 contract. So it's a European DGT-led tender. So they had, and we wrote about this at the time, but they had they were using an online testing platform that basically kind of malfunctioned, and the people taking the tests some of them had difficulties. So the people who were running the tender decided it's not fair because some people had less time. I think the platform failed for some people, or other people didn't have access to support and things like that. But what it meant was that the LSPs who'd participated in this tender some of them had already paid linguists for that initial test session. Because they were wanting to have a redo of the test, the LSPs were then incurring double costs. So obviously LSPs weren't too pleased about that. And they then switched over to managing it by email, I think. So this is like obviously on a massive scale and in a very dedicated time period that they're running it.
So yeah, that is a good point, that it's massive scale and dedicated time period. But just think about if it wasn't the European Union, but like a big private sector corporation, like you wouldn't go to them, like, hey, I need to compensation because I need to take the test again. Right there, you would probably take 3 or 4 or 5 tests just to get the account.
Get the business. Yeah.
You know you will never get compensated anyway, right? I mean, the hoops these big clients will make you go through before they actually give you the piece of business.
Yeah.
This would probably not be the biggest one.
Well, and I think just one final thought, really, which is around RFPs, because I think obviously in some occasions it's actually the customers who are mandating or requiring that LSPs provide these translation tests. I have seen some RFPs that don't request test translations per se, but request sample translations. So this obviously is where the LSP provides translations that they've already done for different customers or whatever, obviously with all of the data removed, that can also help as a testament to the quality that they can produce.
It's just a low bar. I mean, if you can't clear, if you can't clear that bar, then you shouldn't be in that business in the first place. But it does weed out.
It's the same thing, though. If we're saying that LSPs asking translators to complete tests is not necessarily reflective of how they're going to perform live. Similarly, asking LSPs to produce these translation tests is not necessarily going to be reflective of the quality.
It's even worse because they may not even use the same translator, right? So
there we go. Round in circles. I don't think we've solved anything today.
No, we have not. Well, we brought it up. It's an important. It's an unsolved, I guess, problem so far, or maybe somebody can point out a solution by commenting on our YouTube video, for example. You know.
Maybe it needs some technology. Maybe it needs a new startup with an AI name.
Yeah.
So we can then talk about next week.
AI XL8 test. And, you shared a link with me that the Accolade Amplexor deal closed formally today. So they announced it, but now they signed the paperwork, or what's the...
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. This was just a LinkedIn post that I noticed this morning from the CEO of Accolade, saying, I'm proud to announce that Amplexor is joining the Accolade family today. The new ANA group is entering the top 5 language service providers worldwide. So they're referring to it now as A&A. So I don't know if that's indicating a rebrand for the entire group or...
No, I don't think so. Oh, yeah, hang on. I just got a press release from them.
Oh, okay.
Accolade and Amplexor are confirming the acquisition of Amplexor by Accolade Group. Today meaning Thursday, we're recording this one day before we're pushing it live. I don't know. Probably they signed. Maybe now it's
this means it's cleared the, because they were having to do the, what was it?
Oh, yeah, they had to do
AML
that.
checks AML.
That European thing.
Anti-competition, that was it.
Anti-competition thing. Yeah, which that would have been ridiculous if there had been a problem there. Cool. Well, I mean, we're going to hear from Benjamin in a couple of weeks and from Olivier as well, the CEO. So that's going to be great. For now, let's head over to another CEO, to Chris from Summa Lingua. See you soon. And welcome back to SlaterPod. Today with Chris Stanowski, CEO of Summa Lingua Technologies. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Florian. Hi, Esther.
Hi there.
Hey, Chris, where does this podcast find you today?
I'm at home in Krakow.
At home in Krakow. What's the level of lockdownishness over there?
Well, I'm just back from running, so I guess it's not that bad. I mean, like all restaurants are kind of closed. It's only takeaway. Theaters and cinemas and shopping malls are kind of closed, but it's not complete lockdown. I mean, I go running every day and then it's just full of people. So I think it's some sort of a compromise between lockdown and not.
Yeah. Probably smart. But yeah, let's not go into the COVID politics. Although as I said before, it's like who would have thought that pandemic would be the chit chat of 2020? Hey, how was your pandemic? All right. So, well, first of all, thanks for taking the time to do this, and great to have you here, CEO of Summa Lingua Technologies. So, we've covered your company quite a few times in the past because you've done a fair amount of M&A, and also your company was actually, or still is, publicly listed, right? So you have to be very transparent. So that gives us over at Slater a lot of material to work with. But why don't you do a bit of introduction? Tell us what Summa Lingua does, how long you've been with the business, and just tell us a bit more about the background.
Well, okay. So I started the business in 2011, but actually the story goes back a bit. So I come from a bilingual family, Polish Canadian family. Moved to Krakow for my university, for my studies, and just had to support myself. The usual, I had two skills. So I spoke English, and I'm good at being friends with people, and just interpersonal skills. So I was just a little too lazy for translations, and just so started interpreting, consecutive interpreting. So just and then I was fairly modestly enough quite good at interpreting. So I just got more and more jobs, I guess, more orders, and again I was a little too lazy to attend to all of them, so I started outsourcing to a group of friends, and then essentially I had this one larger LSP that has hired me as a freelancer. I've never worked for anyone per se, as an employee, and the contract, and it was a contract with ArcelorMittal, with a steel plant here in Krakow, and
okay.
And yeah, 2008, this whole steel industry crisis hit the world, and I got fired from that contract, or that LSP that hired me got fired from the contract. So I kind of lost my main source of income. So just decided to start a one-man shop as a freelancer, LSP sort of a freelancer, and just kind of grew to a little bigger, more jobs, more clients, and then. I think I met this guy literally in an elevator, and just started talking. I think he was back from golfing. He was carrying a golf bag, which is not something you see very often here in Poland. It's not a very popular sport. And I just kind of asked him, and then what do you do? What do you do? And I told him I have this problem with collections. I probably had the size of business 50,000 euros annually or something, and I told him I have this issue with collections, and then I didn't know how to solve it. And then he says, oh, okay, I'll help you solve them. He runs some sort of a business as well himself. And then I ended up giving 50% of the company to the guy. So
that's good. That's generous of you. Did he help collect at least, or?
I don't think so, actually. And we soon got into some issues and some problems, but then. So I then meet this other guy, and then so I very, very soon I realized I have to get rid of this guy whom I've given 50% of the business to. So this other guy also had an LSP, and then obviously in the meantime, it was 2010, I think, and then in 2011, we knew this guy in Poland as well. He run a smaller LSP as well, and we kind of decided to join forces. So I talked this partner of mine to join forces with this other guy and join these two LSPs. And during that process, we bought this initial guy out. So I got rid of him, and my business also doubled in size. And this was 2011, and this is how Summa Lingua was born, out of a forced merger between two small Polish LSPs.
Wow. Okay. Did he? How was the return for him? Was he happy? Was he a happy person to exit, or?
Well, he didn't. I mean, he didn't pay anything for his shares. He got them for a false, promise of collecting my debts, helping me to collect my debts, which didn't. I mean, it was just a crazy story. The guy went. He had some issues. He went into financial problems. He had a family to support. I think he's, I think the bank has kind of forced him to sell his house. He couldn't pay the mortgage. So he just tried to just squeeze us. I mean, as whatever we made, like a small LSP, right? We're talking 100,000 euros maybe, right? Made some money. I didn't pay myself any salary whatsoever. And like whatever money came in, he just wanted to take that money for some reason. He always like, yeah, this isn't, I've given you this advice or that advice or whatever. Started threatening us. It was just, just had to get rid of him. So we did.
So that's a long road from what you just described to being a publicly listed company. So give us the version. Give us what happened in the meantime.
Later. Okay. So, we had this, so 2011, 2012, Sumalingua. And as we merged with these two smaller LSPs, we thought it's maybe a good idea to do some sort of a rollout strategy in Poland, consolidate the Polish market, the Polish LSP market. So this was the initial idea. So we talked we didn't have money, so we just had to go and secure some funding, mainly debt funding, some early equity, angel funding at the beginning as well, but just had to secure some funding to pay something in cash, but mostly, we tried to pay in stock and shares. So being publicly listed helped us paying in stock. So this is why we kind of wanted to go public. This was the main reason, actually. And we went public in 2015. I think by then Suma was like $1.5 million in revenue. We bought a few smaller LSPs in Poland. And really, then we were just a very not exciting, small, typical, usual, LSP, translation agency. Nothing exciting about it. Just one of the, tens of thousands of such companies working 50-50 for like public customers in Poland, public clients, and some end clients. We never worked for other LSPs though, but I mean, it was just nothing exciting. So 2015, we went public, and then we kind of realized, well, whomever we could buy out in Poland, we've either, merged or bought out. And then it's also fragmented. I mean, there's no local leader as such. I mean, there's ourselves and one more company, but we're Polish, but we don't really work in Poland per se. Out of the Polish LSPs, probably the largest is like 3 million euros or something. So couldn't really grow it's not an interesting market per se for that. I mean, a big market, I would say, for acquiring revenue. So we thought, and one more partner, the one I merged with, he was like in 2015, 2016, he also exited from his other business because he's never run that LSP that he founded. He had people run it for him. He was doing something else. And he exited that business. So we kind of sat down and said, okay, we've done whatever we could have done in Poland. How about we just start traveling to these industry conferences? And we would have gone to the Slater conference, but in 2015, you guys didn't exist, or the conference didn't exist. So we chose others. Okay, we had to go to other conferences. We would have gone to Slater. But we've went to the Elias and Gallas. Yeah. I attended the first one though in London. I remember very well.
I know.
We just attended the Gallas and Elias and ATCs of the world, and we formed some sort of an idea that this business model is not really sustainable. Like just running an LSP like any other is probably not the best idea. And so we kind of want to verticalize into, specialize in a certain vertical or a few verticals. We kind of wanted to get a little more techy than we were. Like, it was zero technology at Suma. I mean, just the usual, a couple of CAD tools and that's it by then. So and what happens? One of these conferences, I meet Madhuri. She was the founder and owner of Mayflower, an Indian company. And we sat down and we're like, okay, so how about we merge? Because she wanted to open herself up to, the Western Europe a bit and the US. We wanted some technology and some industry knowledge that we never had in Poland and, when we started. So some production capabilities. So she brought that to the picture. She was fairly well structured for the size and geography she operated in. So we merged in 2016. We merged and we rolled a new strategy out. I would say we we kind of adjusted our values and decided to build something serious, build something real. So I always say Summa has really, I mean, we started in 2011, but we have really started in 2016. Okay, and in 2016 we were like $1.5 million in revenue, right? Same revenue since we went public. We're kind of flat, didn't really grow that much. So global strategy, vertical focus, more technology, again more M&As, and we thought, okay, it's probably a good time to think about acquiring a serious funding partner, financial partner. So we've laid some sort of a strategy to, at some point, it was a 3-year plan to acquire probably a private equity fund, grow the business from like $1-2 million to like $10 million or so. We wanted to have a global footprint. We wanted to work with end clients, and I think we wanted to have our own TMS. We changed that idea a little later, but we wanted that own technology, focus on capabilities or production in lower cost geographies, revenues in higher margin geographies like the Nordics or the US. And we did succeed with that plan fairly well. I mean, we acquired a company in the Nordics. We finally found a private equity partner in 2011. We grew the business to over 20 million in dollars in revenue in 2019. So I think it was some sort of a successful plan that we've rolled out, and now we have a new one for the next 3 years.
Yeah, so you kind of gave us the picture there with the revenue, the size, right? So it's quite a sizable business now, and done via M&A. So I want to get your take on. I mean, there's so much M&A happening in this industry, and where do you see? Does it add value mostly? Do most fail? Like, what are your thoughts on like the big M&A, like the RWS, the Amplexor, Acolad, all of this, like this whole M&A scene from somebody who's actually done a fair amount of deals in this industry? What's your take on what's going on at the moment?
Well, I think in the first place, I think it's a highly transactional industry for a number of reasons. And first, I mean, the clients are many reasons. Like I said, many reasons why the industry is so transactional. First of all, clients are fairly sticky. The sales cycle is quite long, I would say. It's a big and growing industry, quite economy independent. Obviously, this year is very difficult. We're actually, dependent on the economy of our clients, but it's fairly spread out across all economies or industries. So it's rather a must-have service than a nice-to-have service, right? The volumes are fairly, I would say, unpredictable. It's a little difficult to estimate the exact, like you have a SaaS business where you just know how many licenses you have, but it's a recurring business, but a fairly difficult to estimate, but still a recurring and must-have service. The industry is very fragmented, so a lot of room for M&As. Naturally, the PE partners kind of like the price or valuation arbitrage, where you kind of, there's a lot of smaller companies, 1, 2, 3 million to like 10 million. A lot of them, you can probably buy them a little cheaper than you can value yourselves at the exit when you put them all together. I think it's some sort of a honeypot for all these PE firms now. So they're kind of jumping on it. So M&A will continue. I think we have clearly, the very large players, the super agencies, and they'll need to change hands. Like Semantics is, private equity owned. They'll need to be sold. HIG will probably think about selling Lionbridge at some point. Whatever is left of Lionbridge, the LSP side, We Localize will also need to be sold at some point. The I Buy Everything Acolad will keep buying everything.
We'll ask him at SlaterCon.
Yeah. And then you have the mid-sized companies like ourselves probably. And there's, again, only maybe, 100 of them in the industry. So, again, very interesting and transactional, but there's only a handful of them in a sense, few compared to the size of the industry. So, but the clear case for a private equity investment is actually the M&A. right? So unless you're a tech business, unless you're a MemSource or a CutTool or an XTM or one of these, you're a product company. If you're a services company, it's not really that interesting of an industry for private equities, in my opinion. I think it's interesting because you can execute M&A. So the growth is backed by M&A. But it becomes tricky at the same point, right? Because there's only a handful of companies who've actually executed a rollout strategy successfully. There's quite a few of them who've failed. There's some who've done, one or two, and who knows if it's a success or not. I mean, how do you measure the success of an M&A? It's a little difficult as well. So, I mean, these PEs, I think they look at, either they focus on these huge super agencies, or they look at the 50, 100 companies that they can invest in who've executed a successful M&A strategy, ourselves modestly being one of them. But there's all, like I said, I mean, for just to onboard capital, to fundraise for organic growth, I don't think that's very interesting for a private equity firm to invest in an LSP, in a services company, especially that I think, and that's also you're asking me about the future. I think valuations at the end of the day are a little crazy. I mean, you think about, obviously, these product companies, the tech product companies, it's a different story. But talking about LSPs, like, forget if you're a small LSP, like, let's say, sub $10 million, and you're asking anything more than like 6 times your profits, I think that's crazy. There are some transactions like that. But if it's just a services company with nothing extra, I think that's just insane. And why? Because, I mean, any other services industry will never pay any such valuation. So, I mean, just benchmarking against other industries, and it just doesn't make sense. And even if you're a larger, let's say, in the mid-size LSP, you're asking, valuations upwards of 10, like 8, 9, 10. I think that's high. I think it's just high. And we'll see these valuations drop. Well, I think we'll see them drop because there's more benchmarks, there's more transactions, and I think these if you're really just a services company, you're going to have a hard time selling for times 8 or times 9 your EBITDA. So I think that's gonna change.
You're doing some of the negotiation here. No, you're in the market for buying, so I'd be setting expectations now.
Yeah, I mean, at some point we'll also want to. I mean, the owner will want to exit, so it works both ways.
Right now, primary interest. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but honestly, I mean, if you think about it, you're a services company. Why would anyone pay? You're growing at the industry's pace, 5%, 4%, 6%. Why would anyone buy your business for times 10 your profits? It just doesn't. I mean, in my world, it doesn't make sense.
So let me just ask you about the Lionbridge transaction then, because that sold for like 20 times. And frankly, I mean, I have no particular insight into that business, but it is a service business. I mean, it's called AI, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of humans doing a lot of human micro tasks.
Correct.
So why would that go for 20 times?
But it's a different. Again, it's not an LSP industry, and I think you're I think the only one who doesn't rank. You guys don't rank Appen in your LSP largest, whatever, top. And I think you're right. And I think you're very right. Although they do some translation services, very little, they do some, you're actually getting it right. It's a very different industry altogether. So,
it's apples and oranges. So anyway,
I think that the reason being is because this industry is just booming. There's only clearly Lionbridge at $200 million in revenue was like a market leader with alongside with Appen. It's a new industry. Well, it's been there for a while, but it's relatively new, I would say. So if you have a chance to grow, if you have a chance to triple that business or in 3 years, it's worth paying because your effective price is obviously much less. But if you're growing at 5% rate, nobody will ever pay you anything close to that valuation. So I think that's the reason, the growth of that industry.
Mm. And let's maybe just talk a bit about what happens after the deal's done, and about post-merger tech integration. How do you go about that? How do you deal with that when it gets so complex after multiple sort of M&As and mergers?
Yeah, so very good question, Esther, because I think it's fairly easy to buy. A lot of companies claim a success when they buy a company. I think it's just 10% of a success. It's really difficult to integrate them, and I mean it starts with in our case it starts with a C-level position. We have a chief strategy officer is her official title, but she's actually in charge of integration. So I don't do that, nor does my CFO. I mean, we've made these mistakes in the past. So we have a dedicated C-level role to just oversee integration. That's, I think, very important. And I think integration is a process, I would say, right? So clearly well-defined process, I would say. Production, technology, sales, brand, values, HR, everything is just structured into a process. It has a risk lock against every item, clear deadlines and clear KPIs. I would say what like I said in the beginning, like what does it actually mean that an M&A has failed or has succeeded? It's a difficult question to answer. I think unless you set yourselves with these expectations, these KPIs, you will not know. So I mean, we have them set before any acquisition. We do, and they go about obviously the upsell and retention of customers, but also about the retention of employees that we want to retain. It goes about running surveys among employees that we have acquired that have joined us through an M&A, comparing the results to the employees that we have hired initially prior to the M&A, and looking at how these two groups of employees kind of answer questions like, do you know what a 3-year strategy of the company is? And you would be surprised, right? So these are success metrics, I would say, that you need to define. And obviously technology and that's TMS or ERP that governs the company is a backbone, is very important. So and crucial. The problem is it's integrated with so many tools. It's usually very difficult. And if you ask a lot of companies, a lot of LSPs who've merged or bought companies, that is probably the largest pain point. So it has been our case as well. We have bought a company in the Nordics that had their own TMS. We wanted to have our own TMS. And we've learned the lesson and abandoned the idea of developing our own TMS. So if talking about, and mind you, over 50% of our business has nothing to do with localization. We're more into 55% of our business is in data annotation and in the.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. Yeah. I was going to ask you about this. So how is that to integrate? There's probably very little in-house linguistic capabilities, right? But
by principle, we're not integrating this. It's a separate business. It's a very separate business. And actually, obviously, there's some cross-sell potential, but I think we sacrifice that potential for a greater good. And I think that greater good is not mixing the two. They're completely different businesses. If you see, I mean, like talking about the LSP side of business, our idea is not to have our own TMS. Our idea is not we're a services company. We don't want to develop technology. We have some connectors. We have, the APIs that connect to different content management systems and so on. It's a structure that is a puzzle of a data warehouse and a lot of components plugged into the data warehouse, with Plunet being the production environment, I would say. But as little as we can develop ourselves, this is what we want to do, right? And on the other hand, the data business.
That's just to pause you there for a second. That's the Canadian company you acquired, right? About 9 months ago, a year ago?
Yeah, in December. Yeah. We experimented with data, I think, like some LSPs, right? Because it's an industry where LSPs have some sort of a segue into the industry, because the clients that have worked for have asked them to perform some of these tasks. But I mean, we started experimenting with data, I think, in 2017. We've realized it's a very interesting business. We realized it's a very, lucrative business, valuation-wise. Growth potential is humongous. But we also realized it's not a sustainable business to run as part of an LSP. It has to be a very separate business. So because it's a combination of crowd, human, and technology, and it is still a services business. It has some correlation and similarities to the language industry, the LSP industry, but it's really very different. So you will see some LSPs. I think you even had one or two on your podcast who kind of play with data as well, but still they tend to put them together, mix them together, and perform these tasks, hire linguists to perform these tasks. But I don't think that's the way to go. So in our case, we separate that business completely, and it has a separate management, it has a separate strategy, it has a separate technology. And in this case, all the technology that we use, like let's say 90% of the technology is in-house developed. The annotation platform, the mobile app that collects and processes image and voice and different kinds of data. All that technology is our own, and I think that's the right strategy.
Just one more question about this before we move on. But like that data annotation market is not as distributed as the language industry, right? I mean, it's you don't have this cascade of players. You have these giants and then niche players. Or how large would you say it is? Like there's not thousands of data annotation service providers, correct?
I think you have some startups mainly in the States who have developed technology, and you have some companies in Asia who have not developed technology, but they have a lot of crowd, or they have these cheap labor, and then you have these giants like Appen and Lionbridge, and then a handful of mid-sized companies, and really a handful, like 3, 5, 6 companies, ourselves included, who actually perform these services in a professional way with technology and the crowd. And then you have a lot of LSPs who've been asked by their customers to perform some data annotation, data collection, tagging, whatever services as part of mainly on the client's platforms. And you know, if you look at the LSPs claiming to be data annotators on their websites, I think they just perform some tasks, they staff people to perform data annotation tasks on the client's platform. Very few actually own a lot of IP and actually run that business as a separate business unit. In our case, it's a majority of our revenue. It's 55% of our revenue. So I mean, we give it a lot of attention, and our strategy is actually around, you know, growing that business. It has, I think it's like you said, it's not that saturated. It has more potential. The large accounts are much easier to acquire. There is some consolidation going on. The industry is trying to professionalize a bit. I think that AI annotation industry is trying to professionalize a bit. But you talk to a very different teams of people. You talk to the LSPs. The LSPs talk to the language departments. The data annotators talk to a very different set of people at the same customers. It's just a very different business. And actually, it's like to perform these data annotation, to ask translators and linguists to perform data annotation tasks is not the right way to go. And I think that's the mistake that LSPs make. So
I think I'd like to come back and talk a bit about India. We touched on that slightly before, and it's very fresh in our minds because we ran an India webinar yesterday. So, you know, it's a fast-growing market, still very much emerging. And you're one of the few LSP entrepreneurs who's actually acquired an Indian LSP, and you do business there. So can you tell us a bit more about that deal in particular, and how is it to operate in India?
Yeah, so India for us was our first international deal, very important. And actually Suma, as an international, you know, global company, was kind of born out of this deal. So I think, you know, my business partner Madhuri was the key here. I would have not done this deal if she was not on board and aligned with the strategy. We bought some minority shareholders out, but it was actually a share swap. She's a very significant shareholder at Summa, so it's actually a merger rather than an acquisition. But I mean, just a path paved with challenges. I mean, you can probably imagine a small company buying or actually swapping shares with a small Indian company. I mean, it was just, if I had to repeat this, I don't think I would have. I mean, I'm happy about the result, but I don't think I would have embarked on that road again. All the challenges you can probably associate with India, we faced them. So it's just a challenge, and it's just so great to have Madhuri on board, because without her, we would have failed before we even, boarded that Lufthansa flight to Bangalore. We would have, yeah.
But you're generally kind of a bit of a risk taker, right? You've done the Xfluency project on the blockchain, and then you've done, India. Now the data annotation, that wasn't a sure bet either, but it seems that it's really helping you in 2020. So where does that come from? Is that your pilot gene? I think you're also a pilot, right?
I think I'm an entrepreneur. It's not a noun, it's an adjective in my case. And the risk taking comes from, yes, I am a pilot. I've done also outside of my Summa life, I have done other VC like investments and many such things. I've failed 100 times. I've bankrupted companies. I've invested in companies that have bankrupted. I've just done a lot of many things, and I think that experience is born out of these mistakes. And piloting small, being a pilot is just a hobby, but for business, I'm really an entrepreneur. So all these things come from risk. There is a huge difference between owning a business and being an entrepreneur, I think. And if I were just to own Summa Lingue, it would not be so exciting for me. It would be maybe a nice, profitable LSP, but obviously it was riskier, it was more difficult, caused me sleepless nights and tears and whatnot. But Summa is what it is because I think I was brave enough. I took all that risk in a sense, right? So pivoted to India out of all places. Fired the two partners that I have joined forces with before. Many such, very difficult decisions to take. Pivot into the data annotation business. Pivot into things like invest in things like Xfluency. Xfluency is a product. Blockchain is a part of it, but it's essentially a product that is kind of trying to redefine the workflow of how translations are made and substitute the linguists by subject matter experts in a monolingual editor. Right. So essentially what it is, like, forget the blockchain and everything else in a one sentence, is trying to orchestrate a workflow where you take the empty output and you have a subject matter expert look at the monolingual empty output and enhance it. And this is what they claim is a better way to. So we've invested in Xfluency. I was part of the founding team as Summa Lingue. Obviously, it has a life on its own. It has a separate management. Actually, does not really overlap that much. We use Xfluency in our workflow in our workflows. Xfluency has some first initial customers, some POC, some revenue probably of $500,000 this year or so. But it's a risk. It's a risk, and I'm a risk taking guy, I think. Yeah.
I hope not in the pilot role, though. That's a very solid. Don't take any risks there. Don't go towards the thunderstorm.
Yeah.
Anyway, can I talk a bit more about Poland as well, right? I remember I was there actually for the first time about 4 years ago, and I was so impressed by going to Warsaw and the skyscraper, all the building activity. I know for people who are active in that region, that's not news, right? That it's a very robust economy, but when you look at the figures, this economy has been growing for ever since the early 90s, basically uninterrupted. Like, what's going on in the Polish economy? How important is it for you? What's, just give us a bit more insight there.
Well, Poland is only about 5% of our legacy revenue, so it's not really that important as an economy. I don't think it's also very, very interesting for LSPs, but I think as an economy, it is booming. It has a lot of IT focus, I would say. So there's a lot of IT engineers here. A lot of companies have opened, their BPOs, their outsourcing activities in Poland. So all these large, you name it, corporations have opened offices in Poland. Krakow being, I think, the second or the third biggest outsourcing center in Europe.
But hang on just a second. Just pause for a second. I mean, when it's booming and salaries are going up, isn't that challenging the business model of the outsourcing? I remember it from my days in China. Like when I started, salaries were like a third of when I left, right? So the whole outsourcing play, at some point kind of falls apart.
Very fair point, and I think it is the case because the salaries are obviously much higher. And these outsourcing centers have suffered, but they're still fairly low compared to what we would have to pay in the States or in Western Europe. So there's still a clear financial gain. And I think the balance between, the balance between India and China and the lower wages there with Poland, obviously, you have to pay more in wages, but still you're closer. I think now in the pandemic, since the onset of the pandemic, I think that becomes very important. Any business would rather have an office in Poland than in India or in China at the moment, even if you have to pay a little more. The command of English is fairly good. It's very good. You can, communicate in English very well. It's part of the EU, so you have some sort of a stability of, the laws and regulations and I remember, transferring money to India, and making an international wire transfer out of India. The share swap, I think it took me 7 visits to the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, to actually explain these guys what a share swap was. And actually the law or the regulations or share swaps in India were only voted in half a year before we executed that share swap. So I'm fairly sure these guys have heard about a share swap for the first time from me. So just imagine these challenges. Imagine the challenges, right? And in Poland, you don't face them, right? So obviously the wages in India are cheaper, but I think these corporations kind of weight the balance between the quality and the price and the comfort and easiness of doing a business. And I think Poland is turning well, but I think that's just gonna become more and more challenging, and companies will start turning to countries like Serbia, for example, right? Or it's not gonna last forever. But then we have an economy on our own as well, and a lot of startups, a lot of companies from Poland that are also doing fairly well. So yeah.
I also wanted to briefly get your take on another ongoing discussion in the language industry around pricing models and the future of where pricing models are going to go. So do you see pricing moving long term to, a per hour model or a hybrid model? How do you see that evolving?
Interesting discussion. I think the pricing model is a result of the business model in a sense. And if the industry sticks with linguists, I think, and puts a linguist in the center, I think the per word or whatever the variation of per word will be the going business model, the going pricing model. If the industry believes in something like Exfluency, where a subject matter expert is rather put in the center of the equation and not so much a linguist, then I think you'll just turn to any subject matter kind of a business pricing model. You don't pay lawyers by the pages they look at, you pay them by hour, right? So I think the same will apply to the language industry. Obviously, with the continuous and use of MT, the per word prices will naturally be deteriorating, I think, but productivity gain will be higher. So I think that per hour model makes sense because I think productivity is what matters and not so much, how many words you look at and you can actually process. So companies like Lilt, I think, have figured this out, and they all of their, if not most of their linguists are now paid by hours. I think by hour. I think that's the way to go. I think an interesting idea is something we have been experimenting with quite a lot. Is like the discussion around quality, which is essentially what is quality, and the balance between paying a linguist and getting the right quality. What we've done, especially in the e-commerce industry, e-commerce is one of the 4 verticals that we service. We actually call it like the real voice of the market. Like, we don't really care what a linguist says about the quality of a translation. We want to check what the target audience says about it. So what we do is we have a standard workflow for the translation of product descriptions, the so-called SKUs, where we take the empty output and we would distribute through our own mobile app. We would distribute that a couple of passages from the product description, from empty output product descriptions. We would distribute them between like 5, let's say 5, a crowd of 5 end buyers for a given brand, and we would ask them questions like, does this sound right to you? Do you spot any issues? Do you see anything that would kind of go viral and could be a problem for the brand? We don't ask them questions like, is it linguistically correct? Do you see a grammatical mistake in that translation? These are not the questions we ask, right? And if a product description scores 5 out of 5, it automatically goes back to the CMS and is published at a client's website. So there is no linguist in that equation. There is empty, and there is the target audience validating the quality of the translation. I think that's the way to go. How do we pay them? We pay them by hour. We don't pay them by words they look at, right? These are I would say these are not linguists, right? They look at so I think that's the way to go.
Interesting one. I like that.
That's where data comes together. We use our data app, our crowdsourcing app, but that's only one of the few overlaps between the industry. But we use that mobile app of ours to crowdsource, and actually, it's a fairly, I would say, successful. It's not a product. Again, it's a means to providing our service. But that app of ours is used by over 50,000 unique users every month, and it's growing quite fast. So we had, the 2 months, we obviously tracked that, and it's a result of, it's not about downloading and paying us for the app, it's about performing tasks. But we have over 50,000 crowd members performing tasks on our unique crowd members performing tasks on our platform every month. So it's a fairly, a large, I would say, product, right? App.
Interesting. So before we wrap, let me pick your brain on the outlook for 2021 and a little bit beyond. What are your plans? Where do you see the business going, the industry, both industries, the data and the language industry? So give me the crystal ball gazing.
Yeah, I think the traditional language industry will just stay the same. We'll just kind of keep growing at its natural 3, 5, whatever % rate. I think the revenues are, at least judging by our revenue and the people I know and have spoken with, and even looking at these, public announcements, the translation revenue is kind of back to what it was. Obviously, with some industries suffering a little more, but I think that's just going to be normal. The data is going to is booming, and will be booming. So that's where we see a lot of growth potential. Consolidation will just continue. So you'll see us buying companies, you'll see others, you'll see Accolade buying companies, and everyone else buying companies. And smaller LSPs will want to exit, and they'll see the threat and will want to exit, and valuations will keep dropping. I think that's also important. Bitcoin will grow, I think. I think it's I don't believe, and I think you and I have also, Florian spoke about this early in the March. You've asked me about my take on which industries are going to suffer and what's going to happen. I was very reluctant to being very like, yeah, the e-commerce industry will boom because of the virus, right? Well, actually, maybe the e-commerce industry has boomed because of the virus, but it does not mean the LSPs have boomed alongside, right? Because if you think about it, I mean, the supply chain from China for a lot of e-commerce companies has been suffering. You had maybe the e-commerce companies were selling more products, but not necessarily introducing a lot of new products, and this is where we make money. So I'm not really that much of a, the world would change so much. Yeah, it'll be maybe more remote work than before, but I think we're lazy as humankind. We're lazy. We forget easily. So we'll just be back to normal, I think. And yeah.
You can pilot your plane to Zurich. And
I'll fly planes. Yeah, I'll try to break the 16-minute record on my 5K, running.
You can't wear a mask for that. That needs to be All right. Well, that was great. Very, very interesting. Thanks so much for doing this. And then, do pilot your plane here. We have a couple of airports around here that are not too busy at the moment. So,
I did fly to St. Moritz this year. It's a beautiful and it's an hour and a half, small plane, an hour and a half from Krakow. I went
It's a tough airport to land, though. Isn't it?
It is. I actually had to take a separate training. It's a pilot certified airport where you have to take a special. It's like a 1 hour online briefing before you can actually land in that airport. So it's like in a valley in between two mountains, and so it's a tough one, but very nice, beautiful. It's my favorite place to go on running camps. Altitude is very important. So
you're not alone. That's one of that's one of my favorite places too. If I could afford a house up there. All right, great. Well, let's catch up in real life at some point when this whole thing is over. In the meantime, let's stay connected. And thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah,
thanks
Chris.
You guys take care. Take care.
Take care.
Bye bye.